Okay, so I put this on. Yeah, that works. Okay. Got it? Yeah, that should work. Wait, no, that doesn't work. Hold up. Does everything work, or is everything broken? Everything might be broken. Where might everything work? I don't know. It's a mystery. We'll have to find out. Pa. Ha! Okay, yes. It does work. Or it might work. Ow. Hi! Hello, friends! Today is a GameDev stream. We're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XI. The things about it that worked, and the things about it that really didn't. But more importantly, we're going to go into it from a game design angle. We're going to be talking about what they did, because whether you like it or not, Final Fantasy XI is an extremely designed game. I'm not saying it's well designed. I'm not saying it's poorly designed. But there's a lot of design that goes into it. Or if you ever see me doing this, it means I'm checking chat, because this is how I look at chat. Chat, you're right here. You can't see it, but you're right here. Yes, it works. Okay, so to start out with, we are going to have to talk about what Final Fantasy XI is and how to play it. Which, I mean, that's a big ask right there already. Because Final Fantasy XI is a very old game, and most people are never going to pick it up, and frankly, I can't blame you. It has some issues, but some of its issues are also part of what makes it great. Seriously, it's... Okay, so. First, we're going to start out with a quick primer of how to play. Just because it'll be relevant. Trust me. Because the way that Final Fantasy XI builds community dovetails very directly into its game design, in a way that's very intricate and impressive, and the dev team left us a roadmap of how to get there. So you head to your Mog house, and at the start of the game, you can choose a job. I'm not going to go into like every single bit of detail on this, but you can pick a job. It's the classic Final Fantasy jobs. To start out with, it was just the original 6. Fighter, monk, warrior, monk, thief, black mage, white mage, red mage. So, you take that class, you go out, start leveling up, and at any point that you want, you can go back to town and switch to a different class. Each of your classes has independent levels. Which sounds fine now, because you think, well, Elder Scrolls Online kind of does that. Well, Final Fantasy XIV does that. Well, 30 other MMOs do that nowadays. Well, back then that was new. This was in the era where World of Warcraft was the only other big MMO outside of the EverQuests. And the ability to re-roll a new class without changing characters was innovative at the time. But they did something else, and this is mostly what I want to talk about today. They let you pick a sub-job, eventually, about 20 levels in, so, gosh, what would that be? Probably a good 50 hours in, huh? So about 40 to 50 hours into the game, which is still a very early game. Again, this is an MMO, so like, your concept of early game and late game needs to be, mentally parsed with that, because early game and late game is a different world in MMOs compared to non-MMO games. So, relatively early in the game, you get the chance to pick a sub-job. When you pick a sub-job, you gain all of the stats and abilities of that second job up to half of the level of your main job, or whatever level you level the sub-job to, whichever is lower. Whichever is lower. So if you are level 20 warrior, and you decide, you know what? I want to sub monk. Okay, do it. You get level 10 monk stuff as long as you've leveled your monk up to level 10. Now, from a design perspective, this was made so to give more longevity to an individual character. You had to level up all the different jobs on every one of your individual characters. And most people only had one primary or active character. You might have a second that you use just for extra storage. You might have a third that you use on another server, but by and large, the average player only had 2 characters, and only one of them which was active. Now, what I find interesting about this is that it left traps. It left bad combinations. It left ways that you could make your character that were simply a mistake. You simply had ways that you could make your character that were inherently wrong and bad. And we would usually call that bad design, right? We'd usually say, well, the player shouldn't be able to make bad choices. You should only let the player make choices that, work towards the effect of the rest of the game. But I actually kind of disagree. Because of player expression, you could make mistakes, but moreover, you could make those mistakes work, and you could make builds and dynamics off of those quote-unquote mistakes. And trust me, we'll be getting to that in just a few minutes. That's something that's going to be coming up real quick. So, how do you play the game? It's just a quick primer for people who haven't played, which I assume is everybody because no one's actually played it. You walk out into the field, you find an enemy, you hit it with a stick. Okay, that's how you play Final... No. So. You have... Compared to most modern MMOs, you have very few abilities on very long cooldowns. Like, your first fighter ability is at level 5, and you have literally no other abilities other than hit enemy with mallet until then. And the first ability you get just makes the enemy hate you. Doesn't actually do anything. If you're doing one-on-one with an enemy, it does nothing. And then your next ability is not until level 15, which is a hot minute away. And at level 15, you get a 5-minute cooldown attack buff. And then your next ability isn't until level 30. 30! You have to go another 20 hours of gameplay before you get another single ability. And then it's another 5-minute cooldown ability, and that one raises your defense, and you just don't use it because you usually just want to go aggressive in that game. So why is that fun? Well, there is an interesting point here because mages have a completely different progression path. Mages build up stronger and get new spells every level or every 2 levels, and they're constantly getting new abilities. Think of like Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to play a fighter, that's fine. What do you do on your turn? I hit the enemy with my weapon. Okay. If you want to play a good fighter, what do you do? I charge in beneath the enemy's defenses, behind him, kick the other guard, and then swing my axe at this guy. You just roleplay it more. You just add more content to what you're describing. You don't actually do anything different. You don't. You're playing this. You are basically just making an attack. What does a wizard do? Well, the wizard looks through like 3 different supplements and books to try and figure out what they do on every initiative pass because they have so many options. It's not a bad thing to have different options for different players, especially in a game like an MMO. Because an MMO, keep in mind, is designed to have many people playing it for a very long time, and everybody has a different playstyle. And it's not just I play tank, I play healer, I play support. Different playstyle is also I like to be very active in my play. I like to be more passive. I like to be more focused, focused on what's going on around me. But there's a lot of different ways that you can engage with the game world. So by having fighter have so few abilities, that's fine. It's actually, I think, a good for an MMO, though you could make a strong argument that it's bad for a single-player game. For a single-player game, all these options and having to balance all these options might be too much work. But for a community-based game, for a game that's designed to be played online, a good wizard casts Fireball and only Fireball. You know what? There is the danger of first-order optimal strategies. There is the danger of a optimal strategy where you only do one thing, but that's actually going to be a topic we'll discuss later as well. That's actually going to be one of the primary topics we're going to discuss, is the way that people devolve into creating a single meta that everybody's expected to follow. But we're not there yet. We're barely teaching people how to play. So, if you're a fighter, you go out and you hit things. If you're a healer, and your abilities do nothing. Your ability to makes the enemy hit you. If you're one-on-one, the enemy already hates you. And what does a white mage do? Well, you can heal yourself. If you go out and fight a one-on-one, you can hit the enemy with a little stick that does nothing, and you have to completely disengage from the enemy and take a knee to heal. You can't. And if an enemy hits you, you lose your pace on your healing. You lose how much mana you've regenerated. not how much you regenerate, but you lose you lose your pace on healing. So, what does a white mage do? Well, they have to get a party. The white mage and the fighter get together. So the fighter says, "I'll hit stuff. I'll keep the enemy off of you. You heal me. Keep me alive." This is obvious stuff, but I'm still saying it because I'm building to something. Stay with me. I'm building. I got a whole thing going. I got like a whole plan. I don't have a plan. I can't even see my notes. I don't have any notes, but I could have a plan, and you don't know that I don't have a plan. So stick with me. So, every single job is designed from the ground up for teamwork. One of the biggest flaws in Final Fantasy XI, which many people have rightly pointed out, is that you cannot do anything without a group of 6 people. And that's a little bit hyperbole, and they fixed that later on, but very, very much later on. You had to have 6 people around your level to be able to accomplish any story quest. You had to have 6 people around your level to be able to accomplish, well, any decently paced leveling. If you want to get an XP party, you needed 6 people. But here's the biggest difference between 11 and games like 14 and games like WoW and other MMOs, modern MMOs. You had to talk to them. You had to talk to your team. I want you to imagine, like, no, not like, hey, hi, step over here when the monster does its thing. You actually had to have a line of communication with your team. You actually had to be, if someone was a different language, there was a good chance that you couldn't party with them. Even if they knew their job, even if they were fantastic at their job, you would have a difficult time conveying what you needed to do. Because even in a regular XP party, certain classes had extremely powerful, especially in the mid-game, abilities that required you to have positioning. There's an entire class based off of it, where with the thief, where you would need to have good positioning. And it's not like you can be in a position. You have to be in a position, and the enemy has to be in position, and then another player has to be in another position. Like, you have to have an organizational pattern and path for their abilities to work, because well, okay, I'll explain exactly how that works. Is that the thief has sneak attack, massive bonus damage if you attack from behind. They also have trick attack, significant bonus damage if you attack from behind another player, and all the hate, all the monster's aggression that attack would cause, because enemy aggression, and who the enemy attacks is based on damage and healing, goes to the player that is between you and the enemy, who has to be behind the enemy, because you want to stack these because they stack multiplicatively. You could get 2 times damage off of one, or you could get, closer to 5 times damage if you stacked both of them. So if you stack both of them, you need teamwork. Plus, various classes need other teamwork. Monk can do so much damage, you need to be able to communicate, how much damage am I allowed to do without, am I allowed to take hit? Am I allowed to tank for a few minutes? Am I allowed to XYZ? You had to communicate with your team. And this is not even getting into raids and dungeons and storyline quests, because everything I said is just multiplied tenfold. You can't, I've played plenty of 14, I've played some WoW, I've played other MMOs. And in those, if you know the mechanics, you can enact them even with no communication with the rest of your team. 11 doesn't do that. Even if you know the mechanics, you need to be able to have a full line of communication and discuss with everybody what things are, just what is what. Now, we'll put that aside for now. Just accept for now that everybody needs to be talking, otherwise things don't happen. Okay, so what does that mean? What do people need to talk about? What does that mean with the character classes themselves? Well, jumping back to the previous point, you can make mistakes. You can make combinations of classes that do not work. If you're a fighter, you don't have an MP pool. If you sub-job White Mage, congratulations, you have a sub-job of White Mage up to a couple of spells that don't really amount to anything. You might be able to cure yourself once or twice. Does that help you? No, not really. Not meaningfully. You made a bad choice. You also broadcast that choice to everybody else around your level. And because you have to play with communication, You know people who are around your level when you're leveling. You know other people on the server, even if you don't, actively communicate with all of them, even if you don't know everybody there, you can say, oh yeah, I partied with them a while back, they were pretty good. And that level of communication presents information to yourself and others about your competency, right? It tells other people how good you are, and other people make opinions based on that. If you do a terrible job healing, people aren't going to heal, accept you in a party as a healer. People just won't invite you because there's no auto party system at all. Anybody who wants to join a party puts a flag up over their head that says, look, search for me, me, if you're searching for, someone around this level, I am available to party. And therein lies another interesting point. If you are, say, warrior sub-white mage, you can't do your job effectively as a warrior sub-monk. Because the monk has base stats and increase your strength. The monk's abilities increase the damage of occasional attacks. The monk's other options give them more evasion abilities that let the warrior tank better. So a warrior sub-monk can tank. If people who played 11, I'll get to that, don't worry. If you played 11, you know where I'm going with this. But the warrior sub-white mage can't. They can't do a thing. That's a thing that they are literally incapable of doing. They can't do their job as effectively. A warrior sub-white mage does not make a paladin. You want your sub-job to complement your main job. And what you choose broadcasts. If you are a warrior and your sub-job is thief, well, you're broadcasting to people that you're not here to tank, you might be here to do something else. If you're playing a monk and your sub-job is warrior, you're broadcasting, hey, I'm here to do all the damage forever. If you're a monk and your sub-job is thief, or if your sub-job is another thing that gives you more defensive abilities, you're broadcasting, hey, I'm here to do a bunch of damage, but I also have these other tools to survive. If you're a monk and your sub-job white mage, you're broadcasting that I'm not helpful. Likewise, if you're a black mage and you sub-warrior, you're only hurting yourself. Sub any other mage class, and you have sub-job, when I say sub, I mean sub-job, although you should subscribe. You just, hit the subscription button, where it's down here somewhere. Anyways, okay, so. What does a meta do with this information? Well, Reddit comes out, or whatever forums, or Blueguard, or whoever it is at that time, Alakazam, has a bunch of people on it that all discuss. Yeah, tank sub healer is terrible because you have to expect. Everyone wants to be a specialist. Okay, so people discuss what is the best build, and then most people, the majority of people, jump on that bandwagon and say, okay, this is what's best. We're doing what's best. We're doing what's best because this person said it's best. This person has so many upvotes that I should trust them. This person made a very convincing argument. I'm going to do what they say is best. And that's not inherently a bad thing. That's just the way culture, many cultures and communities work. But it can have flaws, and the flaws are readily apparent. Like, there might be other options that are better or unexplored that are not being explored because someone's already decided what is best. Moreover, to get back to what I was saying earlier, if you are not listing yourself as looking for a group with what is best, I can do air quotes, kind of, a little bit. If you're not doing what is best, you're probably not going to get invites. So there's additional social pressure involved, that you want to be doing what's best, not just because it might be optimal, but for fear. For fear that you won't get a job, that you won't get your job invited, that you won't get invited over someone else. Unless you are playing with a very close-knit group of friends, some job combinations are useless. But there is a really interesting thing in that uselessness that I want to discuss, and this is the crux of what I want to talk about. And I'm primarily going to be talking about one particular class. Actually, let me lay one more piece of groundwork first. The one more piece of groundwork is every class has artifact gear. It's called AF gear. It's just mid-level stuff that is all made for that class. But what's important to us right now is that that gear serves as a developer roadmap for what that class is intended to do. because the gear, the artifact gear, the AF gear, is all class specific. And if you don't follow some of the specific things that I'm talking about, please let me know that I need to clarify, because I might get into jargon. If that happens, just say something, or comment about it in the comments, and I'll respond later. So, what does this mean? This means that the developers made a full gear set, that they decided, hey, this is what's going to work best for this class. This is the ideal gear for this class that we are writing up as of time of writing right now, so that when you get, at time of development, that is, this is developers talking at time of development, we're doing it right now, so that when those players hit this level, they'll be able to equip this gear and it'll be great. Everyone will love it. This is the ideal gear for that class. This is the ideal for that class. So we can see what the ideals are supposed to be. And that roadmap leads to some very, very interesting things. Now, Final Fantasy... Is this working? Am I lagging? If I'm having any stream issues, please alert me. I can't always see things right now. Okay, so. Well, most of those roadmaps make sense. The Red Mage gear, Red Mages are all about tossing around weakening spells and buffing allies. What do their gear sets do? Well, it makes them cast faster, lets them enfeeble better. Okay, it checks out. What is Black Mage there for? Black Mage is there to do damage. What does the gear do? Makes them do more damage. Okay, fine. Sounds good. Maybe one or two pieces are there to shore up a weakness of the class. I think one of them gives evasion, which is useless on a Black Mage, but like, the idea is there. Either it shores up a weakness or it enhances a strength. What does the fighter gear do? Well, the fighter is supposed to be a tank, clearly, so the fighter gear makes the enemy hate you more. Okay, this all checks out. Now, there's one class in particular where you can see what they wanted, and then you can find what the players did with it, and that is the ninja. The ninja is a class that is designed to be an assassin. You are the one who runs out in stealthiness. You grab an enemy, bring them back to camp, and fight them there. And they had an ability that said, hey, occasionally when you get hit, you don't get hit. It's a spell you can cast. Cast the spell, and then the next 3... Can I do a 3? I don't think I can do a... Can I actually make a 3? No, I guess I can't. I don't have a 3. And the next 3 attacks against you always miss. Guaranteed miss. 100% evasion for the next 3 attacks, and then the spell dissipates. This is designed for it to take 3 attacks when you go out, grab an enemy, and are running back to camp panically because, well, usually your party is waiting for you at a safe location for you to fight enemies. Except, not taking damage is pretty strong. Not taking any damage is actually a pretty powerful ability. What if we made it a tank? Now, the ideal distribution of tank classes to other classes should be linear. Like, you should have as many tanks as many healers as many damage dealers, if you're expected to have an equal number of each. Well, you're not. Each party only really needs 1 tank, and each party only needs 1 healer and 1 support, and then you usually have 3 damage dealers. If you're lucky to find a support. Supports were always in short supply, but that's a different discussion. So, there's a problem, though. Monk is supposed to tank. Monk has really high health. Monk has a counter stance that says if you get hit, you ignore the damage and you punch back. But Monk takes too much damage. They can't equip heavy armor. They can't equip heavy gear. And they just do so much damage. They do so much damage that why don't they just attack? You know what? The players decided, you know what? We're not making the monks a tank. It's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. They're not good at tanking. We're just going to take the monks and have them punch things all the time forever. Question about 11. Does gear act as cosmetic expression or as stats? So, yes, I'll go and elaborate more on that in just a moment. So, because that is actually something I'm going to get a lot into as well. But to answer the question right away, it is stats, and it is not always linear stats. That is to say, a higher level piece of gear is not usually does something different, not necessarily something better. There's a lot of horizontal progression in 11, a ton of it. Anyways, so what if the monk just punched things? What if the monk was just a damage dealer? Okay, well, you know what? That checks out. Hey, you know what? Okay, you know, fighters can tank decently, but we have a paladin class. What if the fighter didn't just punch things as well? What if we just give the fighter an axe? You know, better yet, let's give him 2 axes. Let's have the fighter take 2 axes and have them punch things with axes instead of tanking. We'll just have a paladin tank, it's fine. Well, now the meta's shifted. Now nobody is inviting warriors to tank because someone online made the statement that it's better to tank with a paladin. But they're right. I mean, I air quote that sarcastically, but it's true. The paladin is just a better tank, so you just don't have warriors tank because they can't compare to paladin. That doesn't mean they're not useful. They still do a ton of damage, but they can't touch a paladin's numbers for defense, and they can actually do pretty well compared to some of the other damage-dealing classes of that era. So, not taking damage a couple times. What if the ninja tanked? Because we don't really have another tank. We've decided that monks can't tank. Why did we decide monks can't tank? Don't worry about it. Well, we've decided that warriors can't tank. Why did we decide warriors can't tank again? You know what? We just don't invite them to tank, so they can't tank. What if we make the ninjas tank? Ah. So, what if the ninjas tanked? And that's what happened. They took the ninja class, and the players decided, you know what, no, this is a tanking class. We're a sub-jobbing warrior, which gives us access to provoke, which makes the enemy hate us. And then we use our spell that says we don't get hit 3 times. Well, the spell has a really long cooldown. That doesn't work. That can't work. What if we gave them support? Well, what if we just had the mages cast haste on them? What if we just had the bards cast spells that reduce the cooldown of your actions? Okay. What if we hit the mid-game, and there's a second tier of that spell, an upgraded version? Okay, that works. That can tank. Also, when you have the upgraded version, you still have the original, so you can actually cycle between these two. You can say ignore 4 shadows from the upgraded version, and then 4 misses later, cast the first version again, and all of a sudden you're tanking. All of a sudden you have, 7 attacks that you're ignoring, and Ninja becomes not only a tank, but the best tank in the entire game. Because you don't take damage. Now, there's other limitations. Some enemies attack too quickly for that number of shadows to make sense with the cooldowns, and you are completely vulnerable to AoEs. AoEs strip away every single one of those every one of those shadows. Every one of those miss effects is called a shadow. Every one of your shadows goes away with an AoE. Well, okay, we just won't fight enemies that have AoEs. That's easy, right? Oh, okay, well. Some enemies just attack too fast. Okay, we won't fight those enemies either. We weren't fighting those enemies anyways. We're just gonna fight, like, beetles and, beetles and caterpillars. Okay, well, if we're just fighting beetles and caterpillars, that actually sounds really good. But does Paladin still have a job? Well, yeah, because there's not always a ninja to tank. Paladin still worked well. Ninja worked well. And there's a hint in the about who else was supposed to tank. There's another class called Samurai that was very clearly, based on their AF gear, intended to have a tanking role. They have a bunch of parry skill ups, they have a bunch of armor, they have a bunch of defense, of health bonuses. They even have, like, agility bonuses, which increase your dodge rate. But for the same reason as Monk, the same reason as Warrior, it just never was used as a tanking class. So now at this point in the game, you had 12 classes, I want to say? And I can do a 2, right? Yeah. And 2 of them were tanks. Very unbalanced. You had 3 that could heal, arguably. One of them less than the others. I know someone watching this is going to be going into PTSD about that comment. But you had functionally 2 tanks out of all of this, and one of them wasn't even supposed to be a tank. One of them was not even supposed to be a tank, but they worked so well. And here's the thing that I think set Final Fantasy XI's dev team apart from many other, what's the phrase I want to use? From many other dev teams that are in charge of the continuations of game. Because that's usually a different team. Usually the main design team that makes the game is working on another project at the company when it comes time to maintain the game. So like the original dev team may or may not have actually even been still working on this project, but the people who were working on the project saw what the players were doing and said, you know what? I like it. We'll allow it. You know, we're not just going to allow it, we're going to encourage it. You know what? We're not just going to encourage it. We're going to give them the tools that they need to make it functionally intentional. We're actually going to give them the tools that they need to properly tank. We're going to let them do this. And you can actually see, a timeline that shows how people became ninja tanks. Like how the ninja got new gear sets. The dusk armor that you got from Zillart was used. So they started making that because it had plus enmity, which is the stat that makes enemies hate you. The tanking stat. It had haste, which helped your cooldowns, and then they added more gear that give you more enmity, more enemy hatred. And you could just see this line of them slowly accepting, embracing the concept of the ninja tank, and then shifting it into a role that they could manage, not disallowing it. And that's one thing you see in a lot of modern MMOs. You can't play Final Fantasy XIV with a non-standard tank. Okay, yes, someone is in Blue Garter is going to show a video of a white mage tanking. I get it. That doesn't count, and you know why. Because it's so difficult to force a class into a role that's not meant to in that game. Whereas in 11, they embraced it. They said, you know what? Yeah, you can sub-job anything you want. You want to, be a ninja? You want to sub-warrior and tank? Sure. You want to be a warrior? You want to sub-white mage and be bad at things? You know what? Sure, go for it. The ability to make those mistakes made the game work better. And then they nerfed ninja. Not really nerfed, but they adjusted how well it could tank. They said when you lose one of your shadows, the enemy loses a little bit of aggression towards you. Not much, comparable to when a paladin gets hit and takes damage. And people lost their minds. Before the patch that did this even dropped, everyone was saying, wow, ninja can no longer tank. Well, I guess ninja tanking's over. I guess that's done. Well, I guess, there's nothing to do with that now. I guess no one's going to... No, but what ended up... And the reason is not even because of what they were doing. It's because of how people saw other dev teams handling things, Blizzard in specific. Because how people saw other dev teams manage community-created roles, they assumed that they were going to take the ninja tank idea and just crunch it down, good night, not allowed. It is forbidden. That's not the game that we made. That's not the game that we want you to play. But they didn't. They leaned into it. But during that time period, when they announced that there was going to be slight nerfs, there was that fervor, there was that fear, I was playing ninja at the time, and I couldn't get parties. I went straight from being, the best tank in the game to being not even, to being overlooked. I got invited as a damage dealer. And I said, hey, you guys want me to tank? They're like, no, ninja can't tank anymore. This is before the patch even dropped. I was told that I could not tank based on a patch that wasn't live. Let that sink in. Like, that's wild, right? Isn't that wild? I think it's wild. There we go. Pun. I think that's wild. And then the patch ended up being perfectly reasonable. It was just made Ninja late game on par with Paladin as opposed to just being obscenely better than them. So, then people found a new trick. You see, the warrior ability, that warrior provoke ability, it's pretty good. It makes the enemy hate you, gets them really angry at you. But it's an ability, not a spell. And we're already giving Ninja all of these tricks and tools that from the Bard and from the White Mage and from the Red Mage. We're giving the Ninja support for reducing their spell cooldowns so they can use the survival ability, the survival spell. Here's a dumb idea. What if we took Ninja and subjobbed Dark Knight? Why? What you mean to do damage? No, to tank. Because Dark Knight has a spell that pulls a lot of hate. It's stun. It actually stuns the monster for a moment. Okay, well, Ninja doesn't cast spells, but what if they did? We have spells that go off that restore MP. We give those to the mages all the time. What if we gave the Ninja a spell that pulled hate and a little bit of MP? Not much. You don't even gear for it. You just take, whatever the sub-job you get from Dark Knight. You get, like, just enough MP to cast it twice. It's fine. Well, that sounds like a really dumb idea. How much hate does stun pull? Oh, that pulls a lot of hate. Oh, wow. When with all these speed buffs, we can get that down to a really low cooldown. Oh, wow. With that really low cooldown, this works really well. Oh, no. And then the game was broke again. It was great. But this mentality, this idea, this playing with the rules. Now, before this time, if you saw a ninja sub Dark Knight, you assumed that they were soloing, forgot to change their sub job, they were doing, something with friends. You assumed they weren't serious. It wasn't a serious build. It would be laughed out of the room. But they let the players play with things, and what would otherwise be a bad choice, by allowing the player to make a bad choice, by giving them the option of making a bad choice, you also let them discover good choices. You let them discover good and interesting choices. You can also find similar things in like Dungeons and Dragons multi-classing. You can find similar things in, but where you can't find similar things like this is in like 14, because every job has this very, very strict list of abilities that it gets. And back when I played, you couldn't get any functional use out of your support classes. So, it wasn't overnight, but it might as well have been. Like, if you saw a ninja sub Dark Knight, it was probably, it was either me actually testing it, or it was like 2 or 3 people, just who forgot to change sub job or who were just messing around. And then people realized, wait, this is good. And then very quickly, it became the new meta, because someone on Reddit showed off a video of someone tanking something that shouldn't be able to be tanked easily, and just doing it like a breeze. But saying, hey, look, this thing works. And then overnight, the entire structure of the endgame changed, and Ninja Sub Dark Knight was what you did. And you could see a bunch of ninjas leveling up Dark Knight because they didn't have it leveled, because why would they? You could see a bunch of ninja leveling up Dark Knight because apparently they had to now, and everything shifted. Like the entire landscape of the game changed drastically in a very short course. And I find that fascinating personally. Hello, friends. So, what changed? Nothing. That was always an option. That was an option for years, and no one touched it. Because there are people who make exploration choices with their character, and people who don't and simply follow what is quote-unquote best. This is also true in card games. There are people who make decks and people who download decks off the internet. It's also true in, I've even seen, quote-unquote meta builds in Skyrim. I remember seeing one quote-unquote exploit. This is my favorite Skyrim story in the world, by the way. This is my favorite Skyrim story. There was someone posted an exploit saying that if you go get iron from these caverns and take it to a blacksmith, you can forge them into daggers. And then as you get better at it, you can sell the daggers for infinite money. All you have to do is, get a bunch of ore and smelt it and turn it into daggers. You can make a ton of money off this. To which someone replied, and bless their heart for doing this, Someone replied, "That's not an exploit, that's a job." But like, sorry, I love that so much. Where was I? But yeah, this mentality is true in a great many games. This mentality that what is here we must assume is best until someone shows me otherwise. This mentality that I'm going to download this Magic the Gathering deck and play it because, well, somebody else tested the deck, they know it's good, but it's good in their meta. It's good in their group, it's good in their tournament level, it's good in their specific situation. That doesn't mean it's good for you. Likewise, for something like Dungeons & Dragons, well, this such and such ranger build was the optimal DPS. You can do the most damage with this build. Okay. So? That doesn't mean it's necessarily, doesn't mean that you should play it because of that, I guess. But this is a MMO, and you're expected to work towards a certain level of competence. It's assumed that you are going to work towards a certain level of competence, right? Okay, yeah, no, I can accept that. So you should do the meta build. Except that some things are comparable. Remember what I was saying before about Monk? It's a really good example of this. You could play Monk sub-warrior, and you did all of the damage forever. You had all of Monk's damage abilities, you had all of Warrior's damage abilities, you had a ton of health, and you just punched things. You did so much damage that even a good paladin couldn't hold hate off you. You couldn't actually party with ninja, because paladins could hold more hate than ninja could, so you just actually couldn't party with a monk and a ninja, because the monk would do too much damage. The ninja wouldn't be able to tank, because they don't have enough tools to tank. Well, okay, but what if the monk sub-ninja and took some of those shadow abilities so that they don't get hit as often? Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no, that checks out. You still have a lot of damage, and you have a leash on it, but you also have a safety net so that you don't take as much damage. Okay, I can see it. What if you took Monk and subbed Dragoon? Well, why would you do that? That's dumb. Well, there's some Dragoon, some gear that gives you really good haste bonuses if you sub Dragoon, and you have the jump ability. You don't get the Wyvern, but you still get some other damage actions. And you get an accuracy bonus. An accuracy bonus puts you over enough accuracy that you don't have to worry about it with gear. You can gear for attack. Now, people would hear that last one and say, "No, that's dumb. Get out of the party. We don't want you. We don't want a Monk's Dragoon. No, that's not good." But the thing is, the honest truth is that it performed on a level of those other two classes that were good. They were comparable. Yes, one was better. But that doesn't mean that the other one wasn't viable. And the meta only accepted optimal builds and rejected viable builds, even when those viable builds could situationally outperform the optimal build. Does that make sense? When the build is optimal, everyone's happy. When the build is viable, you find yourself only able to play with friends, even though you can be just as strong, just as effective in most party situations. And again, you had to talk to your party. There was no auto group, there was no dungeon finder. You had to convince a human being sitting on their computer that you are worth having in a party. And if you had a non-optimal build, if you didn't have the Blue Garter or Reddit build, then you had a harder time convincing somebody that you were worth putting in your party, because they thought of you the way I talked about the Warrior sub White Mage, or the White Mage sub Thief. Okay, cool. You're not getting use out of any of your abilities. If you do those are genuinely bad. Well, the other ones aren't bad, they're just not optimal. But not optimal becomes bad in the minds of people who think that they're optimal, I guess. In the minds of people who think that what they're doing is better than what anybody else is doing. People think, oh, well, yes, this is what we're doing, this is good, this is fine. This is optimal. This is correct. This is the way it should be. What does that mean? Well, it means that you have to convince another human being that you are worth taking into a party. It means that you have an uphill climb, and again, there are two. Where's two? Where's two? There are... No, that's kind of two. There. You had 2 tanking classes. You had 3 healing classes, and one of them didn't really work as a healer. Well, you had 2.5 healing classes, and you had 2 support classes. Okay, that's 6. Half of the classes in the game, 50% of the classes in the game, were damage dealers. You didn't... If you were playing a damage dealer, you didn't have much option. You didn't have much choice. You didn't have much way to be good at, to convince people that you were worth it over somebody else. You had to say that, yes, my warrior sub-dragoon is good. And not only that, you had to say, yes, my warrior sub-dragoon is good, and convince another human being of that. Not only that, you had to start the conversation that said, I am worth taking your party over that ranger, that monk sub whatever, that dragoon, that samurai, that dark knight, that warrior, and that other yeah, that other warrior rather. And that was borderline impossible because of the community side of it. The community both saved and broke the game. Kinda too? What broke the game is that you had to be able to get parties. And you had to be able to do it effectively. Now, let me pivot into gear. Because gear had the same thing. Now, 11 had a lot of horizontal progression, which means that multiple things around the same level area serve different purposes. It was not uncommon for a level 75 character to be wearing level 24 pieces of armor, because that level 24 piece of armor did something different and more effective than everything else up the chain. I've actually quit multiple MMOs because when progression was too vertical. When the only thing that a new bow did different than the old bow is +3 damage, it's not interesting. But if the new bow has, I don't know, the ability to do poison damage, or if the new bow has, some other stats on it, if the new bow gives, has shorter range but higher damage, or longer range and lower, like if there's other options, if there's other things that make it interesting, well, that catches my attention personally. It doesn't not be true for everybody, but that's what catches my attention personally. Because that means you have the option for player expression. That means that you can express yourself in your character mechanically. You can say, this is a good fit for me. Now, you did not see people's gear when inviting them. You only saw their job and their sub-job. And if you only see their job and sub-job, well, you don't have as much information going in, right? You just have to hope that they're geared up competently. I mean, if they have weapons from half their level ago, that are half their level, they're not going to be doing good at anything. And you had to have a reputation, in some sense. Again, you don't know everybody on the server, but if you see a warrior who hasn't leveled up any armor, who is wearing trash gear, who's just can't hit the enemy because they have no accuracy buffs on him at all, you ignore them and walk away. And even if you don't blacklist them, you're certainly not going to invite them again. And that word gets around. And people who were bad at the game, well, it showed. And this was never more true anywhere else than with Ninja. Because this is an MMO, and because people want to go to the top as quickly as possible, and because the Ninja, there were people who sold accounts. There are people who bought and sold accounts, so you could have someone who has never played Ninja before buy a max level account. And this was more common, and this was exactly as common as you might think. If you've been in the MMO sphere, you know this. You know this is a thing that happens. But the thing is that in Final Fantasy XI, it was different. Because you needed the skill. You needed the skill and the reputation behind it. If you were bad as a ninja, It doesn't matter if you're level 75. It doesn't matter if you're max out gear. You're just going to get hit and you're going to die. You had to be good at the game, at least competent at the game, or at least viable at the game. You had to have a certain level of skill. And again, different classes, this is going back to what I said earlier, different classes had different skill requirements. If you're playing Monk, all you do is punch, and most of your damage comes from auto attack. You hit the auto attack button, and you go make a sandwich. And then you come back, eat your sandwich, and say, oh hey, I'll hit an ability. If you're playing Ninja, you need to be staring at your screen and with the veins showing through your eyes as you time things perfectly in tune with the enemy's attacks, also accounting for server lag. No, really, you actually had to account for server lag if you were a ninja tank. You had to account for what an enemy's attack animation looked like and what that attack animation meant in relation to your casting animation, because if you got hit while casting, there's a good chance it didn't go off, and if it didn't go off, if you're with your shadow spell, you got hit. And if you got hit, well, another attack was coming right away. Different classes had different attention requirements, even, is what I'm saying. And someone who doesn't and somebody who doesn't meet those attention requirements simply is not effective at that job. And somebody who's not effective at that job gains a bad reputation. And someone who gains a bad reputation doesn't get invited to parties. And somebody who doesn't get invited to parties, effectively, it has no reason to play the game. Remember, you can't solo this game. You can't play this game at all unless you have the ability to prove yourself to the general public and their concept of a meta, or a bunch of close friends to play the game with. Ideally both. Usually what you did is you had a couple of close friends that you played the game with, and then you grabbed in some other outsiders for whatever, to fill holes in your party. If you have a healer that's not online, you would grab a healer. Usually you had mostly you had the staple of a tank, a healer, and a support, and then you grab some damage dealers along the way. That's at least in my circles. That's what happened often. Okay. Well, this doesn't appeal to everybody, right? I mean, it can't. It can't appeal to everybody. Is it supposed to? Is it supposed to appeal to everybody? Well, it's an MMO. It's a commercial product. It's supposed to appeal to a wide range of people. Okay. But isn't that bad MMO design? Isn't it? You're not appealing to your target demographics. You're not appealing to a broad enough audience, and you need the broad audience appeal to be successful. Well, okay. But let's flip the script around. The people who were good and who had communities and who were recognized as at least competent, viable if you will, they were more invested in 11 than most MMOs because their community was server-wide. You could say your name and someone else might recognize you even if they'd never partied with you because, oh yeah, I've heard about you. Because people talked. It's an MMO, of course people talk. No, they don't anymore. Not nowadays. They don't talk about, they talk about people in the abstract. It's not, you're unlikely to come across the same person again and again when you have cross-server Dungeon Finder functionality. Why would you? There's no need to. So what is that? So, okay. Well, if you have bad gear, then you're going to have trouble getting parties. If you don't follow your job's role, you're going to have a hard time getting parties. How do you explore? I didn't say 11 was always good. There's a lot of bad things about it, and one of the ways is that you needed to explore the mechanics. But you couldn't. How could you explore the mechanics? Seriously, how? Because if you have an idea, you need a group of friends to try it out with, and then you need to convince the public eye. And there were good combinations that were undercut. Thief sub Corsair. I won't get into all the specifics, but it gave you many options that actually were very viable in game activities. Or, yeah. Anyways. But you can see what these jobs are supposed to do, and then you can see what they were turned into. Now we're going to touch on... Gosh, we're already an hour in, and we're just going to talk about skill chains now? Oh my golly. So, skill chains. What's a skill chain? If you time your actions correctly, and you both use your weapon powers, your weapon skills, in order, you can chain react them. And if you do it in certain combinations and with certain actions, well, they can be ridiculously powerful. For example, one fighter hits it with a sword, then has enough of their resource to use Fast Blade. You go chunk chunk, you hit the enemy, good. Then someone else hits it with a punch, and then you get an additional explosion by chaining those two abilities together. And these abilities have a long, I won't say cooldown, but you have to build up enough resource to use them, okay? And then the enemy also gets super weak to a magical element for a few seconds. So if you have two party members, weapon skill, black mage cast spell, you could chain together and get, frankly, obscene damage numbers, even against enemies that were much, much higher than you. But it required communication. You had to be able to say, okay, so I'm going to do this here, and then you follow me on the skill chain? Cool. Hey, Black Mage, we're about to do the thing. You get ready with that spell. And the Black Mage will say, okay, I'll start casting when you do your weapon skill, so that my finish casting when you do the thing, and then boom, I'll explode the enemy. It'll be great. It'll be great. You had to talk to people. You had to organize. And again, with Thief, remember Thief had to do positional stuff, because Thief had an attack that did, like, close to triple damage on one of their weapon skills. In addition to the double damage attack from the trick attack. In addition to the triple damage attack, roughly, from the sneak attack. If you stack all of these in a line, all of a sudden the Thief is the strongest damage dealer in the game for half the game. If you communicate. If you don't communicate, you don't have it. But if you communicate, you can say, okay, you do this, Thief and drag, whatever. You get in position back here, you do that, the mob takes half its health and damage instantly, and then the Black Mage takes care of the other half. This was very difficult with international people, groups. It really was. So, this moves into difficulty. And what difficulty looks like in a game like 11, as opposed to what difficulty looks like in a game like 14. I'm going to talk about 14 specifically, because it's supposed to be it's the next Final Fantasy MMO. It's the successor to 11 in a lot of ways. So I'm going to talk about it specifically. In 14, the difficulty is, can you memorize this sequence? Sometimes it literally is a game of Simon, other times it's a metaphorical game of Simon, where you have to go to this position and walk over here, and then you have to hit this point over here, and that's the mechanics for the fight. You say, okay, I'm here. And you don't need to talk to anybody to relay this information. If you know the fight by watching it online, for some of the mid-range fights, for not some of the endgame fights you do need more communication, I'll admit it, but for most of the fights, you are following a flowchart. You're following, say, okay, I go here, then I go here, then I go here, then I go here. Okay, got it. Let's do this. We can do this thing. In 11, the difficulty was, do you know your job well enough to handle situations that might crop up? Do you know your job, your class, well enough to handle whatever we happen to throw at you at the time? Which is a much different type of skill challenge, right? That's a much different challenge. The question is no longer, can you memorize the sequence? The question is, can you react effectively when things go south, when you have a collision between fans and other stuff. And, well, I mean, on a personal level, I like that difficulty more, But moreover, based on our discussion point, is that requires communication. Let's say that the puller is going out to go grab an enemy for the party to fight. And all of a sudden they have 3 enemies following them. They go, hey, guys, I'm coming in with 3 enemies. Oh, beans. Okay, everybody react. Well, you know what? The monk is sub-warrior. We'll have them tank one of them for a few seconds, and we'll have the black mage sleep the other one. Okay, cool. Well, the bard lullaby the group, and just everyone pays attention to when they stand up. We'll just hope for the best and pray that the white mage can handle it. That's usually what happened. But in either situation, it's an unexpected situation. Both these situations, all these situations, are unexpected, and the question is, can you handle what the game throws at you? Which is not easy. But it's also just a different mentality. Your brain has to be in a different brain-mind space to think, like, okay, you can't autopilot it as much, because in those situations, even the classes that were less active, like the monk, like I said before, who usually doesn't have a whole lot to do, might need to step up and say, okay, this, go. Okay, if we skill chain down the first one fast enough, just go with your skill chain, I'll follow it. Yeah, you might have other options there. There were also some more weird, I guess, examples. Like, specific party builds that were interesting because... How can I phrase this? So black mages had some spells that did absurd amounts of damage, but had a cast time of like 20 seconds, 20 real-life seconds, 20 actual human world seconds, which is just too long. And there were specific parties that said, hey, wait a minute, if we got 5 black mages, we can kill anything, and we can kill anything. Just, grab an enemy, put it to sleep, we can all sleep. And then all 5 black mages go 3, 2, 1, now, and start casting their massive, massive big spells. And you had separate black mage parties that were just all about black mages. And then the only other one I can think of offhand was the monk parties, which were hilarious. You basically took a bunch of monks and said, hey, we do double damage to skeletons. What if we just go kill a bunch of skeletons? And you just took 3 monks and a couple healers and said, okay, think enemies are going to die before they do enough damage, and we're just going to get a ton of XP. Those are hilarious. But they're also a result of this exploration that doesn't exist in so many games. I think that was one of my problems with Scarlet Nexus, is that there was no exploration. There was only really one way to play the game. If you had an enemy that did this, you had to do this. If you had, you couldn't really make any meaningful choices. And every upgrade was linear. Every upgrade was just that this does more damage, this does, has more health. You didn't have any player expression in it. You didn't have any way of saying, this is my game, I'm adjusting this game to suit me. And not all games need that. I mean, look at Chicory. There's a game literally about expression, and in the actual combat sections of the game, you have no way to express yourself. You have literally, it's an entire game about expression, and yet during the actual intense parts of the game, your expression is meaningless. Now, you could argue that that is intentional. I don't know that it is, though. I genuinely don't know. That could be intentional. I don't think so, though. Because the rest of the expression comes back. So what is player expression, useful for? Well, in an online game, player expression is, in a way, it's everything. In a way, it's how you present yourself to the world. It's, it's your skin. It's your body. And look at how many games sell skins. It's the entire, Fortnite is a store that sells skins that happens to have a video game attached to it, right? Well, how do we reconcile these two concepts? How do we deal with this? Well, okay, let's think about this. Okay? One sec. Okay. Well, We can make the player expressive through emotes, through gear choices, you know, like visual, like just cosmetic stuff. But think for a second about how that differentiates itself from we're going to allow the player to express themselves mechanically. We're going to let the player express themselves through how they use the verbs in the game, through how they use the systems in the game. Well, many people net deck, and many people look up the quote-unquote best solution online and do that. Some other people say, I'm going to experiment. And sometimes those experiments are rewarded, and sometimes they fail. Sometimes things fail. This happens. Trust me, I pioneered Ninja Sub Paladin. You trying to use the same concept as the Dark Knight, and it didn't work. I tried it. I tanked some stuff with it. It didn't work. Whatever. It was science. I think there's some potential there on certain enemies, but regardless. Oh, I guess I should probably drop some of my cred, huh? I should probably drop some of my cred. I have played Final Fantasy XI for a very long time. I don't play it actively anymore, but I started just a little bit before the North American release, and I have tens of thousands of hours logged in the game. My link shell had an expansion named after it. That's fact. That's true. That's actually true. My link shell had an expansion named after it because we were very focused and very active during the previous expansion. Yeah. Anyways, I need water. Where's my water? Where is my water? Heck. Oh, my water's over here. Hello, water. I would like some water. Ow. Ah, I have had water. Now, where is everybody? Ah, there it is. Okay. So, mechanical player expression differs wildly in different games. One of the most obvious examples I can think of is a game like Castlevania. Some people like the greatswords, some people like the axes, some people like the daggers. And you can choose what works for you. You can do whatever you want. On the other hand, you have games like God of War, where you aren't playing yourself, you're playing Kratos. Kratos uses an axe and a sickle. Like, the dagger sickle things. There's probably a chainsword? I don't know. No, chainsword's something else. I don't know what they're actually called. The Blades of Chaos. I don't know. I know what they're called. I don't know what they're actually... What real-world equivalency would be. Never mind. Don't worry about it. Some games allow player expression and even revel in it. Again, you know, your Castlevanias, your Wonder Labyrinth, games like that. You, as a player, are encouraged to find what fits you. You're encouraged to find out what works for you. Skyrim is another fantastic example. Many open-world games take this route. If you're playing Fallout New Vegas, you can do a melee build. You can do an unarmed melee build. You can do a small weapons build. You can do a big weapons build. You can do energy weapons build. And even in those categories, when you say small arms, are you a pistolier, or are you a rifle user? And again, compare this to your God of Wars and things like that, where you don't really have a choice. You have the weapons that your character has, and those are... Oh, hello, Goliath. You have the weapons that your character has, and that's what you have to work with, period. And then you have many, many games that do something sneaky. And I like this. I'm not saying anything bad about this. This is actually a good idea. You have many games that split the difference into different skill trees. And those skill trees are kind of a successor to this sub-job system in a sense. Like, Borderlands is the one that hits my mind off the top of my head, but, I mean, there's a great number of games like it. Again, even your Horizon Zero Dawn and your Far Cry's have similar things, where you have a very limited and very narrow list of options, but you have 3 different paths. You have 3 different paths that you can take, and you can mix... Oh, hello, Tara. And you can mix them up. And if you mix them up, different things happen. You know? I mean, of course they do, but do you go deep into one skill tree? Do you dip into another skill tree to get a couple points in something else? How much are these abilities allowed to overlap? Are they allowed to overlap at all? Maybe the abilities are so independent that they don't actually make any meaningful choice. Or, and that was kind of the case in Horizon Zero Dawn, the abilities didn't actually overlap in a way where I could meddle with them and find a combination that was interesting, unique, and, you know, broken. Well, some again do, and I'll go back to Borderlands on this. You can take some skills from different trees and create some combinations that worked extremely well. Now, usually in many of those games, the later abilities were just so much better that you were better off bulldozing through a tree, but you had the option, and the option wasn't inherently bad. Again, viable. Not optimal, but viable. A viable choice is a choice that will let you play the game, that is a functional means of playing the game, that works, that fulfills all the requirements for you to play it. The optimal choice is different. Now, I mean, another example of expression is in a game like Dota. Now you might think, what? No. Dota, League, these don't have any player expression. You do what the build is that you do. Well, no, actually. Especially in Dota, where items give you new abilities. That's not most items in League don't have abilities on the tier of the ones in Dota. But in a game like Dota, where items give you different abilities, you can start to make some combinations that might be quote-unquote off-meta, but might work in your specific situation, that might work with your specific enemies, and you might get the ridicule of your party for not going with the meta build, or you might win the game because you picked a counter-picked an item against your opponent. And again, communication is important. Communication, honestly, in a lot of ways, I would argue that Dota is more like Final Fantasy XI than Final Fantasy XIV is. Because of the communication aspect. In Dota, you have to communicate with your team. If you want to win. Yeah, I know. But if you want to win, you communicate with your team. You don't have too much of a choice there. Well, you know, we should probably change the scenery. I'm going to head over this way. Wait, no I'm not. That doesn't work? Yeah, okay, I'm taking you with me. Okay, I wasn't sure if I was taking you with me or not. We're gonna go up to the auction house area. No, we're not. That's closed. There's boxes there. I guess that area isn't designed. That's too bad. Got it. I don't know what you guys can see right now, but we're just going to pivot into a new region. It's Terra. Hey, Terra. Hello. I would like to... Heck, where is the thing? Dang it, where is it? The zone's being cheeky. Oh, there we go. The zone's being cheeky and being fancy. I know what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. How are you guys doing? This is one of the endgame areas. Okay, great. Sorry, just making sure the stream is still working. So this is one of the endgame areas in 11, which is exactly what I want to talk about. Because 11 has a very interesting endgame progression. Specifically, that for about 10 years, it didn't. Okay, what does that mean? How can that game not have an endgame progression? What is that? What are you talking about? That's craziness. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. The level cap was raised a couple times throughout the game, from 50 to 55 to 60 before the North American release, to 65 to 70 to 75, which is when they released this zone, by the way. Is Rise of Zillar was the still 75 cap raise. And then the game stayed at level 75 cap for a decade. Quite literally, it stayed at level 75 cap for 3 expansions. 3 fairly large expansions. Okay, that's weird, right? Like, isn't that wild? Well, yeah, it is. How did they keep player engagement without raising the level cap? How did they keep player engagement without having a treadmill? I'm getting a bit of lag here. I'm actually going to go through this area. I can probably do something fancy here. There. So how did they keep player engagement for a decade without any new level cap, without any big carrot on a stick? How did they make it so that players still cared about the game, frankly? I mean, actually, hold on, let me reposition the camera. There, that's better. Hi. So how did they keep player engagement for a decade? Well, horizontal progression taken to the extreme. I don't think I've ever seen any game push horizontal progression as hard and as solidly as they did in Final Fantasy XI. What is horizontal progression? Horizontal progression is when you improve the player's options without inherently improving their power level. They made this zone. They made this zone, and they added what we call the gods. They were the gods. And if you're familiar with Chinese mythology, you'll recognize them. It was Genbu, Yako, Kirin, Suzaku, and Seiryu. Okay, cool. Why does anybody care about that? Well, you care about that because that's where the best gear came from. If you wanted good gear, if you want a good endgame gear, you had to go to Sky. You had to go to this zone here and fight gods. Okay, cool. I played the game. I got a bunch of god gear. Now what do I do? Okay, we got an expansion coming. Cool. What's the expansion about? It's mostly story. What? Yeah, it's mostly a story expansion. Yeah. Wings of the Goddess. Okay. But this is an MMO. We don't care about story. I mean, we care a little about story. By the way, Wings of the Goddess is low-key one of the best storylines that Square Enix has ever written. Real talk, it is. But if you've actually played 11 and go into the story, like, I imagine it doesn't fill itself out as well in cutscenes, but if you just watch it online. But yeah, it's actually anyways. Wow, what does that do for you? What is that? Why do people care about this? Not an easy question, right? Well, they added new zones, and those new zones had new enemies, and those new zones had new functionally gods. And they added a couple of other ways to get different gear. They added a couple of other smaller key raids, and they expanded on the system of getting different end gear. So basically, you had 4 different ways to get end gear equipment, level 75 equipment. You could either come here and fight gods, which required a team of 18 people and who were invested in the world and who were already pretty well geared. And then you could get gear that you could give to those people. Or you could do Dynamis, which required 40 people, but less organization. Like, you could actually just jump into Dynamis and follow basic rules. You didn't have to have the organization and teamwork as this, but you still had to have 40 people. And do that and get gear. Okay. What you can do is Limbus, which gives you upgrades to your gear that you've had before, and it turns your old mid-range artifact gear, the class-specific gear, into endgame gear. Okay. Or you could go to this new zone and fight these new gods. These new gods have different endgame gears, and some of it's in completely different slots and configurations. Okay, so we have 4 different endgame sets. No, we have more than that. There's also crafting endgame sets. Oh, okay, so we have 5 endgame sets. No, we have more than that. There's also oh no, it's 5. Okay, so we have 6 endgame sets. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 6. Okay, we have 6 viable. Again, not optimal, viable endgame sets of gear for each class. For at this point in the game, 15 classes, I want to say? No. Actually, no new classes were added in COP, so it was still 12. Is that right? I mean, it's on my off. Hello, friend. So, okay. Do you get to just pick which ones you want to do? Well, kinda, yeah. I mean, if you don't like fighting gods, then you can go do Dynamis. If you don't like the 40-man raids, you can go do Limbus. If you don't like Limbus, for whatever reason, I don't know, I thought Limbus was the best thing in the game, then you could go fight the sea gods. And if you don't like fighting sea gods, you can go do, like, make friends with crafters and just farm up money. If you don't like doing that, you can find something else. Like, there are so many different ways to get endgame gear, and that you could actually pick the path that you wanted to take and the community you wanted to be in. If you enjoyed the style of 40-man raids, you had a path that had viable gear for you. If you enjoyed the frantic, panicked nature of Limbus, you had that as a path. If you enjoyed Sky and fighting the traditional gods, you could still do that. They were still there. There were also the high notorious monsters, the HNMs, which were giant enemies that you actually had to fight against other parties to get control over. Well, horizontal progression. Were each the sets the same, just with different stat levels? No, they were all completely different. They did different things, and that's what makes them interesting. Completely different sets, and the optimal gear was usually some of A, some of B, some of C, some of D. The optimal gear usually ended up being some combination, some mix set of all of these. And very few people had optimal gear, which expanded to a new mentality where viable was more accepted gear-wise. The this must be best was still optimal for characters. You were still expected to be a Ranger sub warrior as opposed to Ranger sub samurai, even if Ranger sub samurai was a viable option that did tons of damage and sometimes did better numbers than Ranger sub warrior. You were expected to do Ranger sub warrior because that's what was expected of you because of meta, because of the internet, because of people who net deck and say, well, this is what you should be doing. This is actually a public world, and I'm just waiting for someone to pop in right there. Like, someone's going to take that same teleporter I did and just, like, appear right there. Just any minute. This is going to happen at some point in the stream, I swear to heck. Okay, so you actually had the ability to express yourself through mechanics with gear. Because each of these classes had different playstyles in and of themselves, even if two different ninja sub warrior played differently. Two different warrior sub ninja, I guess, whatever, played differently. Two different rangers had a different playstyle based on their gear. You had crossbow rangers who were doing a bunch of status effects, lowering the enemy's defense, and then shooting for a bunch of damage rapidly by just basically converting money into damage by using really expensive bolts very quickly. You had longbow rangers who only fired once every 5 or 6 seconds, but had to have the right positioning. They had to be the exact distance away from the target, and they had to shoot their bows, and every missed shot was important, so they were always geared for maximum accuracy. You had rangers that, you had gun rangers. Take what I just said about longbow and amp it up even more. Guns had extremely slow attack speeds. One missed attack set you back like 8 seconds. But when you hit like a bloody truck. Okay, so you have different playstyles within the individual classes. Warrior, you could what you had in your offhand made a big difference. Ninja, what you did with everything made a huge difference. And even what was optimal was under so much debate as to not even be worth considering sometimes. Like, the optimal gear set was A, unattainable unless you did literally every single different endgame activity. Every endgame activity ran differently. Okay, so if the endgame sets are different, well, then we're going to accept you into the party based on what you have. And we're actually not going to worry about your gear, because as long as your gear is viable, then sure, come on in. So you had player expression stymied. You had player expression stuck on some fronts, and yet acceptable in others. Heck, even in something like Warrior, you could use a great axe or 2 hand axes, or if you were really cool, an axe in your main hand and a sword in the offhand. Or if you were super cool, you could do the fancy double sword build that required you to have a ton of endgame gear, but if you had the special sword that let you do that build, then you were literally renowned across the entire server. Everybody knew you because you had become one of the gods. Well, how do you progress from that? Okay, new expansion time. New expansion, new expansion, new expansion. Still 75 cap? Okay, okay. So we're keeping level 75 cap. That's fine, that's fine. What are we adding? More story! No one cares about the story. Okay, they do care about the story, though. Okay, fine, they care about the story, but no one actually cares about the story. No, actually, people do care about... No, they don't. No, they don't care about the story. They're playing the MMO. They're playing for the mechanics. They want new fights. Okay, we got new fights for them. Really? No, I'm kidding. We just added a whole bunch of new zones. There's no fights in them. Of course there's fights in them. Okay, yes, okay, fine. We have new paths for new endgame gear. Okay, we have new endgame gear. That works. That works. That's exciting. So is it upgraded off the other one? No. This is 3 years after the last expansion. 3 years later, I think. And we have Wings of the Goddess. Wings of Altana. There is no level cap increase. There's, I think, only 1 or 2 new ways to get gear, and one of them was a catastrophic failure. They wanted to add a new crafting system, and the new crafting system was just completely broken and useless. Like, it was, like, I don't even mean, like, you know, yeah, this just genuinely was not useful. They tried to blend crafting and gathering items for enemies that dropped rare materials, but it just fell apart. It didn't work. So, okay, that's fine. Another year down the line. I think it was only a year and a half because this one came out a little bit sooner than the others. There's a massive expansion. Huge expansion, tons of new content. Some storyline, but no, you know, this is mostly a content expansion. Cool, cool, cool. Same level cap. Same story. How? Well, now you have a new 6-person raid that you can do for endgame gear. You only need 6 people, and it's not even that hard. Okay. Okay, cool. We added new NMs. Except now you can farm items to get a hold of them, so you don't have to worry about. So you have large-scale fights that you can do if that's what you enjoy. Sorry, there's some pollen falling off the trees, and it's really pretty. I don't know if you guys can see that here. You miss MMOs giving players more choices like that? That's exactly what this entire stream is about, right? Not just MMOs, games in general. Okay, so we have a new expansion now. Great. You can do 6-man raids. You can do new NMs. Cool. Nice, nice, nice. We added this weird thing called Nizal Isle that also has a bunch of gear associated with it. What is it? What do you do in there? I don't know. The rules change every time you're in there, so you can't plan it. You can't plan it. You can't plan ahead of time what's going on. You have to react. You notice the trend with what I was saying earlier about the difference between 11 and 4. Okay, never mind. Yeah, don't worry about it. Okay. But they still kept the level cap. And except now, that level cap has a ton of gear accessible. You have 5 different base game ways of getting endgame gear, plus 2 from the first expansion. Well, from the second expansion. I'm not the first endgame expansion was the second. Was the no, never mind. So you have the first expansion gave you 5 different methods of getting endgame gear. The second expansion gave you 2 extra ones. The third expansion gave you really honestly just 1 extra one. And then the fourth expansion gave you an extra 3 ways of getting endgame gear without raising the level cap. You could just go out and have fun and do what you defined as fun, because different people have fun different ways. You see how this ties together with what I was saying all the way at the beginning of the stream with like Monk and how they had a different activity set and a different amount of engagement with the game. They didn't have to... Yeah, the amount of focus that they put into the game was just straight up different. Not better, more or less, just different, really. So now you have, like, 10 or so? A dozen? Different ways of getting the same tier of gear. Was this engaging? Yes. Why? Why was this engaging? Because isn't this just all overlapping? No, because they're all different styles of getting gear. Crafting is different from camping H&Ms. Camping H&Ms is different from 40-man Dynamis raids. 40-man Dynamis raids are different from 18-man Limbus raids. 18-man Limbus raids are different from 6-man assault raids. 6-man assault raids are different from 18-man farmed NMs from a different way. All this is completely different from crafting, which is its own little subset of world, which has its own mythology attached to it, which I'm not even going to get into. Seriously, there's like a genuine fan mythology about what made crafting work in 11. It was phenomenal. I loved it. It was hilarious. So how they keep player engagement? By diversity. By making so many different things that you could do that you had choices in what you wanted to actively work towards. Did you really want a Dynamis piece but didn't enjoy Dynamis? Well, that's fine. Here's another comparable piece that you can get from Limbus. Here's another comparable piece you can get from Assault. Here's another comparable piece you can get from an NM. A different NM that you don't need to camp. Do you like farming gods? Cool, go farm gods. There's nothing stopping you. Do you already have all the gods gear and you want to farm more gods? Cool, dude. Go farm the sea gods, because those are a different set of gods that functions very similarly. You don't like the 40-man Dynamis raid? Okay, that's fine. Do you like it? You want to do more of a Dynamis raid? Okay, we added more Dynamis zones, so if you like 40-man raids, we added 3 new raid zones for that. Do you like these short little missions, like, the little 18-man missions? Cool. We added an entirely new set of those. They had so much diversity to appeal to people who wanted to play different styles, people who wanted to play different things, even though... So people were playing because they wanted to play, not because they were grasping at new gear, because again, most of the gear, especially if you've played from the beginning, was side grades. You had A, and now you can replace it with B if you want, or you might stick with A. It doesn't really matter. You were playing the game because you like playing the game, not necessarily because you were chasing gear sets. And this is different from many MMOs, right? Like, a lot of MMOs, you do it because you're chasing that next gear up, which gives you more stats. And if the stats are just number goes up, not a way of influencing your playstyle, you see I'm tying back in together the way that gear influences playstyle, then you're not having... How could I phrase this? Then you're going about the game in a different way. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And if you're going about that game in a different way, that doesn't make it bad. But it's harder to justify chasing a gear set that doesn't give you any new options. If it's just +3 strength on this weapon, if the next tier of upgrade is just a higher level, a higher item level, well, some people don't engage with that as much. And other people do. And it's just, again, different styles for different games. But we don't have anything like 11 anymore. I mean, yes, technically 11's still around, but it's hard to play because, like I said, you need already to have a group. If you haven't already been playing 11, unless you have 5 friends that are going to play it with you, it's hard to get into. Genuinely. It's just genuinely hard to get into. They did fix that at one point, and I could backtrack and talk about that, because that's a really interesting story in and of itself, but yeah, I'm pushing 2 hours now. I can probably start getting into that in a few moments. If anyone has any questions about or thoughts on this, feel free to toss them in chat. I am checking chat, by the way. I am reading it. You are all adorable, and I love all of you. Okay, so what does a party look like? Well, okay, you have a tank, you have a healer, you have either 4 damage dealers or a support and 3 damage dealers, depending on how many supports are actually online. Okay. What if there's no supports online? Oh, well, you grab another damage dealer. Okay, okay. What if there's no healers online? Oh. Well, that becomes harder, doesn't it? Well, if there's no healers online, we can make somebody heal. We can take like a red mage who's supposed to be support, but we can make him a healer. Oh, something's being weird with my VR headset. I don't know if you guys are seeing any variances. I probably should change zones again. I'm changing zones again. New world, new discussion point, new world. Oh. New discussion topic, new world. That's the plan. Probably get the... Let's get that world tree in the background there. Nah, actually... Okay, you can barely see me. That doesn't work as well. Let's shimmy. Let's shimmy. We're shimmying now. We're going over here. Okay, so, where was I? I was talking about stuff, probably. Probably talking about stuff. I think I covered most of what I wanted to cover about Endgame. Most of what I wanted to cover about Endgame was specifically about what I said. It's about a horizontal progression and how to maintain a player base through horizontal progression, because there's still people playing 11. 11 is actually not a dead game. And like I said, if you haven't played 11 before, it's going to be hard to get into. But hard is not impossible. Actually, that looks pretty good. Do that. There. And honestly, if you have, a group of people who we want to play with, I'd actually recommend going into the stories. Like, it's genuinely some of Square Enix's, Square Enix has written a lot of good stories, and a couple of the stories in 11 I think are some of their best work. But I probably have dissenting opinions on that. Okay, so where was I? What am I talking about now? I am talking about the ability to play with friends. Because that seems like it should be taken for granted, right? You should be able to play with your friends. Okay, cool. Except for one little thing. If you're not the same level, then it's hard to get together with the friends, and sometimes that difference is the only difference of 3 levels. If you're level 24 and your friend is level 27, maybe you can't, you're getting to the cusp where you can't party with them anymore. You can only party with someone who is with plus or minus 2 of your level, really. Across, the entire party. Oh no. Now, the answer seems obvious, right? It seems super obvious, and it seemed obvious at the time, too. If there's one complaint I have about 11, and there are many, if there's one complaint I have about 11 is that they were a good 4 to 5 years behind on every idea, every cool concept that would have fixed the game. 11 is, yeah, Zethan, if you have friends who would play with you, this is actually what I'm going to cover right now. There are ways to do it now, and I'm not going to say you should. I'm going to say that you should consider it. So, okay. So, your friend, they used a non-looping audio here. They're actually making the audio fade out, and is it just going to pop back in? Nope, we have silence. Okay, just played once. Oh no, there it is. Okay, yeah. Okay. Hi. Okay, so. The answer seems obvious. You're too high level. Well, we should add a function that either lets lower level tier up to work with the higher level character, or something that makes the higher level character tier down to work with the lower level character. That seems obvious, doesn't it? Of course you do that. Of course that's what happens. Except they didn't. For much of 11's history, and that was added in I want to say 2003, 2004 in City of Heroes. You could do that. They had a system in City of Heroes as early as that, and that's to my knowledge the first mainstream MMO that had the option of level sync. You had a sidekick system where a high-level character could take a low-level character and scale their abilities up to be on their level. They didn't get any of the new abilities they would gain as they level, but their low-level abilities got stronger so they could actually work with their friend and play together. This is obvious, of course. Of course you want to play with friends. That should be the first thing you consider when you're making an MMO. How easy it is to play with friends. It took them 15 years to add this. I'm pretty sure that timeline is, if it's not correct, it's close. It took them like nearly 15 years to add a level sync option so that somebody at a higher level could scale down their level to play with a friend. Before then, if you wanted to play with a friend, you had to be around the same level, and in early game, before you got your travel options, you couldn't go from here to the first zone that we were in easily. You just couldn't get there, so you actually had to have geographic restrictions too. And they started the game with 3 cities. There are 3 cities that you can start in, which are literally on opposite corners of the world. You want to play, okay, I'm from Windhurst. Cool. You're from Sandoria. Cool. I guess we can't play together for another 15 levels until we get to the same region. I guess we can't play with each other for 10 hours of gameplay if you know what you're doing, or if you don't, if you're actually a noob. I guess you can't play together for, you know, a dozen hours of gameplay because you are literally on the opposite side of the world and do not have the tools to traverse it, or the skill to traverse it. Both. You had neither the tools nor the skill to be able to do it. Which is absurd. I mean, it's simply absurd. Now, admittedly, many of those early levels you can solo on literally any class, but you shouldn't have to, right? You shouldn't have to solo at any point in an MMO, is my argument, unless you're doing it for fun. There was one class that actually was solo only in 11. I mean, it actually was amazing in parties, but people didn't bring it to parties because it could solo, and people who took it did it to solo because they wanted to solo. So even though you could take the solo class, the Beastmaster, all the way from level 1 to max, everyone did that. Even though you could take them in the parties and they were actual genuine monsters, like absolute behemoths in parties, no one took them because it was assumed that Beastmasters always want to solo. Anyways, that's a side thing. Very interesting class design, though. Very interesting class design that I'm not going to get into right now. So, you want to party with your friends. Okay. We're not the same level. Heck. Well, bye. I guess I will wait until you're a higher level, or I won't, or, and what usually happened, I will keep a job around your level. So, like, let's see, I'm mostly a ninja. Cool. I have max level ninja, I have all this cool stuff. I will keep my warrior at your level. You're level 40 warrior? Cool, I'll get my ninja up to 40 over the weekend. I'll play with you on Tuesday, and we can have fun. And then you would not touch and then you would static party. You would sit static with the same group. Again, community. If you wanted to play with your friends, you had to keep a job around the same level. It goes back to that community thing where you had to be alongside them. Okay. What do we do if there's no healers online? Oh, well, just uninstall the game. No. That's kind of what it boiled down to, though. Like, if you didn't have any tanks online, you either got a class that didn't usually tank and you got asked them to do it, or you just waited for potentially hours for something to happen. 11 required a bigger time investment for this party system because, again, there was no drop-in, drop-out party. And you couldn't solo XP, not in a meaningful way. Quests didn't give XP. Actually, that's an interesting thing in and of itself. Quests gave story, narrative reward, and it gave item rewards. Quests didn't give XP. You couldn't get XP from farming. Any enemy that actually gave you meaningful XP could kill you if you were solo. So you had to have at least 4 other people. You had to have usually a full other 5 people to party. Now, some people who played Guild Wars might be thinking about the mercenary system. And that's actually something that they added in 11. I don't want to say recently, because I think it was added like 5 years ago, but it was very, very late in Final Fantasy XI's life cycle, but they did actually add that. You can actually get NPC companions to fill holes in parties nowadays. Which is good. I mean, that's actually great, you know? That's a good way. If like, we don't have a healer, okay, we'll get this NPC mercenary healer. We'll have someone use their trust abilities to add a healer to the party. Which is good. But that's part of why 11 is playable today. Because even with a dwindling player base, you can still collect a couple of these trusts. They're called trusts. They're the same functions as the mercenaries from Guild Wars. And let them gap fill your party, and some of them are actually quite good. One or two of them are arguably better than most party members you could get. So, they fixed that, but the thing is they fixed it so late in the development. They didn't add wardrobe. They didn't add the ability to have cosmetic gear different from your stat gear until $16 after development. Like, it was super late. Like, it was super late in development. Everything they did was so late. They didn't add the ability to level sync. They didn't add until later. They didn't add the mercenaries until super late. They didn't add cosmetic separate gear, which was funny because some of the best gear in the game through most of it was like bright neon orange, and people hated it. Everyone was wearing this optimal gear and and laughing at how ugly it was. I thought it looked kind of cool, but that's me. Heck, one of the best weapon, the best in slot item for many classes was a big pointy hat. Like a full on like, you know, big pointy witch hat for melee classes, no less. Why? I don't know. It's just what they did. And is that silly? Of course, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. But they were always behind, and I think this comes down to the number of developers they had on the team. I don't know. I don't know, but I suspect. Well, no, that's not true. I actually do know at certain points in development, but I don't know throughout the entire cycle. Anyways, they were very short-staffed because the game was being maintained. Any devs they had were either working on expansions or hammering out bugs, because in an MMO you need to be able to stamp out bugs as soon as they crop up, because a game-breaking bug shatters the entire world, right? It's a persistent online world. There were times where someone would figure out how to make infinite money. Well, yeah, in an online MMO, that's a problem. That's a bigger problem than it is in, you know, in an offline game. That's a bigger problem than it is in Skyrim. Okay, so that's nice. But why did it take them so long? I think genuinely they're just super short-staffed, and the people they had were either working on other projects simultaneously, or working on future expansions for content, because they needed to have new content for better player retention. Which, you know, again, MMO, you need that player retention, you need the new content to flow at periodic intervals, and with the horizontal progression, by keeping things at level 75 cap for, again, you know, the vast majority of the game's life cycle, you had to have a constant stream of new ways to play and new items of different abilities and different effect to keep the game relevant and interesting. And if it wasn't relevant and interesting, people would stop playing. Okay, so why it took them forever to make these adjustments, though, which is tragic. It's just unfortunate. What else did I want to talk about today? Oh yeah, to summarize, for most of the game, you had to have either a group of friends or the ability to appear towards the meta. You had to appear towards whatever was recommended on Reddit to be respected enough to be invited to join a party. And if you didn't have that, you couldn't advance. You literally couldn't play the game. And classes that were off meta, like Dragoon and Dark Knight, like, just wouldn't get invites, because there were always damage dealers looking for group. There were always warriors, monks, you know, and for many levels, thieves who wanted to party. And if you had a list that involved, you know, 2 warriors, a ranger, and a dragoon, you don't invite the Dragoon. You just don't. The Dragoon doesn't get a party. Because they don't have, they're not the optimal meta build. Are they viable? Yes, they'll absolutely be good. They'll be acceptable. They'll get you more XP than not having anybody by, good margin. And honestly, a well-geared Dragoon or Dark Knight will get you faster XP than a poorly geared warrior. But because they can only see the class and sub-job when they're searching for party members, they skip over the ones that don't meet the meta. That don't meet what they define as ideal. Oh my gosh. Thank you very much. Let me see. Thank you very much, Zeth. I appreciate that a lot. And heyo to you too, friend. So, they couldn't see your gear. They could only make a judgment based on your class, and if you were off meta, Dark Knights could sit for hours. Dark Knights could sit for literal hours without getting a party. And, well, how do you have a game with people who are not playing it? How do you have Dark Knights still playing a game if they're not getting invites? If they are sitting for hours of playtime not playing the game? There was on-running jokes that multiple classes like the Dark Knight were sitting here, were sitting in town, playing on a Nintendo DS. The joke was that the Dark Knights were not playing the game; they were posting on forums instead because they were off meta, because they couldn't convince a party of reasonable people of that their existence was worth having in a team. That's tough. I mean, okay, from a game design perspective, I mean, that's tough to deal with. People have been so engrossed in the meta dynamics that they're hurting your player retention. They're literally hurting your player retention. If a player wants to primarily be a Dark Knight, if they care more about Dark Knight than any other class, they either need 4 other friends or they're not allowed to play the game. And supports were very difficult to come by, so what happened is exactly what you think is happening, that you'd have supports like bards and red mages who are always in demand say, yeah, you can invite me, but you have to take my friend. That's how Dark Knights got parties, is by making friends with red mages and saying, hey, you need a red mage in your party. I'll be your red mage if this guy comes with me. Otherwise, bugger off. And, I mean, yeah, it's a solution, but it's not a good solution. It's not a solution that a game designer can rely on. It's not a solution that fixes the problem, right? Like, that's, a solution for an individual. That's not a solution for the system or for the game. You either need to convince everybody that each class is viable in its own right, which is hard to do. That each class is viable in its own right. They were. And again, let me remind you again, every class was viable in its own right. In terms of XP, in terms of leveling up, in terms of grabbing a party member, every class save one, but I'm not getting into that, was viable in its own right. I am going to get into that. The one that's not viable is Dancer. Dancer was not viable because it healed, but its healing ability did not scale. Its healing ability did not scale with level. So late game, you just couldn't heal enough to actually be a healer. It was a class that was really fun to play, but no, don't worry about it. It had problems. It was really enjoyable, and its bigger use was that it functioned as a healing sub-job for non-mage classes, which let some classes solo. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. The problem is the Dark Knight and the Dragoon. You sat in town and read forums. You sat at work and did your job until you got a party, or working from home or whatever. You sat and played on your DS until you got an invite. That's not sustainable for a player. That is not sustainable for player retention. How could you fix this? Because we've already established that the players are going to striate into metas. And when the players striate into metas, then they're no longer going to accept certain classes, and players who play those classes are no longer accepted themselves. You see why this is a problem. It's obvious. But the solution isn't. Well, modern MMOs take the route of saying, well, if you're a DPS class, just join a Dungeon Finder, you'll get DPS, invites. You'll get shoved into there. Oh, you think Bard's a better DPS than Monk? Well, whatever, you're doing Dungeon Finder. You're just gonna grab someone who's looking for a group on each category, and eventually you'll get, a Monk instead of a Bard. Whatever, it's fine. But that doesn't work with the community aspect of the game. That doesn't work with it being an MMO. That doesn't work with its existence of it as an MMO. Because there's no communication, there's no learning. Everything that I was talking about as a terrible thing is also the game's blessing. It's just as much the game's blessing as it is its curse. Because without that community aspect, by the only way that the way that with the solution rounded out, was something that just doesn't work in other areas. It's something that just doesn't work in other sections of the gameplay. By making this Dungeon Finder system, by making this XP Finder system, you don't have the community aspect of the game, which is what made MMOs in general, before recent eras, MMOs. You didn't have this communal aspect. And yes, the 14 has link shells. Yes, WoW has, I forget what they're called. Yeah, guilds. Like, you do have that style of community, but you don't have the wider township, I guess. You don't have the wider community of saying, oh yeah, I've worked with them before. Oh yeah, I've seen this person in a party. They don't do their job. Oh yeah, I've seen this person. They're great. Because many of the Dungeon Finders are across platforms. Or not platforms, but across servers. Which again is great. That means that the players who are doing Dungeon Finder can get parties right away. But on the flip side, you can't require communication. You don't talk to the parties. You have no reason to talk to the people on your party. And in some cases, you literally can't. You can't stop agreeing with me? Well, thank you. I am occasionally clever. Not really. I just have a background as a game designer, and that's why I'm discussing game design stuff, because, again, like it or hate it, 11 is a very designed game. It's not always well designed, it's not always poorly designed, but it's a very designed game, and it left a lot of tracks. It left a lot of roadmaps in its design to find out what the devs were working on. What the devs were thinking and what they were planning is all very laid out, and I appreciate that. We're going to Bastok, or Sandaria. We're going to Sandaria, yeah. The looping music was bugging me. The looping music was actually starting to annoy. This time, the music is going to be better. It's going to have bagpipes. Actually, the camera's perfect right now as well. Sweet. I love it. Okay, so. Now what? Honestly, this covers the majority of what I wanted to discuss. This covers the majority of what I wanted to talk about. Was player expression and metas, and the conflict between the two, and the fact that there is no definitive resolution path. If you break down the player meta, like in the way that many modern MMOs do with the Dungeon Finder system, well, now you might say, "Ah, beans! I got a Dragoon in my party. I was hoping we'd get all bards," but you don't quit the game. At least I hope you don't. If you do quit the game but you have a bad party, just be better. Be a better person, please. All the classes are viable. Even if they're not all good, they're all viable. But that cuts off many of the other aspects of the community by not allowing the community to make these choices. Likewise with the sub-jobs. The sub-jobs left you with bad options. There are straight-up negative outcomes. Black Mage sub-Thief does nothing. So your sub-job helps you not at all. You could do Black Mage sub-Warrior. It does nothing. In fact, the majority of sub-jobs are nothing to you. If you're a Black Mage, you're either sub-White Mage, sub-Red Mage, or sub-Summoner. Everything else was trash. Sub-White Mage gives you access to some minor healing spells, most importantly status condition spells, so you can get, slow or poison off somebody. So Red Mage lets you cast faster, which directly helps your Black Mage spells, and Sub Summoner gives you more int and more mana, so you could just be Black Mage. So you just Black Mage things harder. Every other sub job in the entire game was demonstrably bad. But by allowing you to make a bad choice, they allow player expression, and by allowing player expression, they allow neat things to happen. Allowing neat things to happen makes the game worth coming back to. Allowing interesting things to happen lets there be situations in which you can create something new. Again, Ninja was never supposed to be a tank. Every single evasion tank in an MMO today is based off of this exploit. Okay, it's an exploit in a sense. Before the devs leaned into it and made it work as was an intended mechanic. Every single evasion tank, from everything from WoW to WildStar, is based off of this ninja exploit that existed because they allowed the players to do weird things that the devs didn't intend. They allowed the players to do something that the developers didn't intend for. The devs opened the gates and said, play. Go play. Not just with the game mechanics that we made, but go play and find new mechanics. Go play and find mechanics that we didn't even think of. Go find combinations that are weird. Find something that's broken and make it work. Find something that's exciting and make it, fantastic. We encourage you to break our game. I am making a game here that lets you do things. Not a lot of games do that anymore. I mean, Fallout is another game that lets you do that. You can make, quote-unquote bad builds in Fallout, combining weapon types and skills that don't congeal. But that's a single-player game and no one cares. Same with Skyrim. No one actually, it's a single-player game, so it doesn't matter as much. But it seems like the only modern games that really give into player expression in mechanics, not aesthetics. In aesthetics, yes, lots of games are fantastic in allowing you to look and style yourself visually however you want. But in terms of mechanics, very few games allow you to mechanically differentiate yourself from what the developers designed, unless they're single player. How do you mechanically distinguish yourself in Fortnite? Or Apex? Or, 14. How do you mechanically distinguish yourself in Final Fantasy XIV as one white mage to a different white mage? You either heal people or you don't, and people don't care. People don't care because if you're not healing people, you're not doing your job as a white mage. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough, but there's no real way to express yourself aside from switching to one of the other classes that do the same thing and use that as a type of expression. Everything's cut and dry. Everything's laid out for you. You are playing their game. You're not playing your game. You're playing their game. You're playing their game, and I think that's the distinction that I want to make, is that freedom of player choice and player expression. Oh yeah, the bagpipes here are phenomenal. I love it. What's something that bothers me about 14? I've come to understand that's not meant to work. Yeah. Yeah. And just toss more clout around. I have played 14 all the way to endgame at the time where endgame was Twintania, was Bahamut's Coil turn 5, which I did pre-nerf at level 50 cap. I'm one of the few people who did that battle pre-nerf before and pre-level cap increase, which was well considered the hardest fight in the game. So I played into the end game of 14. So just so just so you know, I'm not just so you guys know that I'm not just blowing smoke. I have played these games. Okay, so. Is there another way to fix this? Is there? Okay, well, let's think about this. Let's say right now that there, what should we take for as an example? Let's take Fallout. let's take the player expression that you can have in a... let's even go to Skyrim. Let's go to Skyrim. Let's say that you're playing Skyrim, and you want to play a weird class combination. You want to play a Great Axe Restorationist. No problem with that solo. How do you how do you take the systems of Skyrim, allowing you to pick any weapon and allowing you to pick any class or any specialty, any magic, any specialty, and allow that to not to be played online in a way that doesn't break down into meta divergency? That's a hard question, right? It's a really hard question. You either take away the options to increase playability, to increase the number of people who are allowed to engage with the game, and risk the meta. I don't want to say not existing, but risk breaking down the communication, or you cut down the player expression. How do you keep player expression? Well, what would happen if 11 had a dungeon finder? Well, it would be broken beyond belief, of course, because initially they wouldn't even allow you to queue for a tank unless you were, the quote-unquote tanking classes, which, as we've discussed, is a non-starter because the tanking classes can't tank. Paladin is the only tanking class that can actually tank. Every other tanking class is unable to tank. Samurai, warrior, monk, no. This game went well beyond that. Hell, they actually even added in a new tanking class, and it was bad at tanking. They added in the rune fencer, and it ended up not being a great tank. Because of course it's not a great tank, because the tanking is so established in this game that you can't really work with it. And essentially, how do you prevent a narrow meta? Yeah, exactly. How do you prevent the meta game from crushing in on itself and having players only accept what is meta? I feel like you either need to shrink the community size, just take the MMO out of it. Again, I talked a little bit about Dota earlier, and Dota has that player expression, that mechanical expression through your build, through your item build as well as your skill build, but mostly the item build, if we're being honest. Either way. Anyways, that is a player expression that works, but you don't have the community aspect in the same sense. Not really. Not in the Dota 2 era. Yeah, you did back when you were playing Dota with, what was it? TDA? TDA? What was the Dota association? Gosh, I cannot remember that association name. The old competitive Dota scene. Anyways, regardless, that's, one option is to take away the massively multiplayer aspect and the community aspect. I think the best way to do that as a new designer, if you want to make an MMO that allows player expression, and you don't want to make a survival game because that's not an MMO. I'm not going to talk about survival games this stream. That's neither here nor there. I don't think they solve the problem, if I'm being honest. They don't. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that. How do you solve it? I feel like the best way is to convince everybody that all of the builds are viable. And let's start with that. Okay. Let's talk with people and convince them about what is not optimal anymore, but what is viable. Well, if a viable build can complete content, a viable build can get you from point A to point B and complete story missions, and it works. It's not optimal, but it's viable. So the warrior sub ninja, optimal. The warrior sub monk, viable. It works. The warrior sub dragoon actually is viable with a great axe. Genuinely it is. But everybody hated it because it wasn't optimal. But how can you convince people that it's viable? You don't want to lean too hard on the meta association angle, in a sense, because you could create pariahs. You could create that Dark Knight effect of people who are not allowed to play the game because they're not chasing the meta. But you also don't want to toss the community out. So you need to convince all the players that everything is viable, but the only way to do that is to remove player skill. The only way to convince people that everything is viable is to say, okay, anybody can do this, instead of saying, well, if you're really good, you can pull this off, because then you have that pariah effect, because you're not going to get invites unless you've already established a reputation for being good, which is itself very difficult to do. I will definitely look up more music in this genre. I adore these bagpipes. These bagpipes fill me with joy. I wonder if these bagpipes cost me subscribers. Actually, we've probably been here long enough. We should shimmy on. I'm going to go to my favorite place in the game. This is my happy place in Final Fantasy XI. This is the place that brings me peace and comfort. That in the background. I get there. That's a really good angle. Actually, that's great. Up. Welcome to C. This is one of those endgame aims the endgame areas that I had talked about before. Also has phenomenal music. Can I turn up the music on your guys' end? I think I can. Heck, that's actually really quiet. World. Okay, that's just being really quiet now. Anyways. Where were we? Okay, so how do you solve this problem without destroying community? How do you fix what is in effect a broken system, broken by the players by establishing such strict meta rules in what you're allowed to do as a player? Well, as I was saying, if you can convince everybody that a build is viable as opposed to optimal, and then convince people that viable builds are acceptable, people are willing to accept them. And this is what the Dungeon Finder system does. You don't have a choice of who you group with, so you get grouped with somebody and you have to say, well, okay, that's going to be fine. But to do that, you can't have broken builds. If you do that, you exclude broken builds. Like, if you do a Dungeon Finder in a system that allows a warrior to sub white mage, what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens, because people will see a warrior sub white mage and say, wow, you're just bad at the game, and leave. And in a sense, they're right to do so. In a sense, that's actually not even a bad response, because yeah, that subtype is trash. It doesn't help you in any way. But you need to convince people that other builds that are viable, and you could restrict out just the trash options, but that runs a risk too. If you restrict out the trash options, then things like Ninja sub Dark Knight might have been considered a trash option at one point. Then things like Thief sub Corsair might have been considered which is a damage dealer subbing a support, might have been considered a trash combination that might not be allowed. Well, that turns out it actually works and is viable, but the devs didn't know that going in. The devs literally didn't know that going in. The devs didn't know that when they made the game. They left the tools in there for the players to decide how to handle these systems. So how do you let the players convince themselves? Because that's what it comes down to, right? The players need to convince each other. The players need to convince each other that their systems are viable. I don't have a definitive answer on this, by the way. I don't actually have a magic bullet here. This is all consideration, but it's consideration that's worth thinking about, especially if you're making an online game. Like, yeah, if somebody is taking a bad class in Apex Legends, well, you deal with it because they're on your team, and each class is accepted as viable, but then you kick out player expression. If you allow player expression and force teaming up with players, then you run the risk of players teaming up with genuine bad builds, not just inferred bad builds. Again, Ranger Sub Samurai was inferred as bad by the community. That didn't make it a bad build; it was still viable, but people considered it to be to be unplayable, and they were wrong. I mean, genuinely, they were wrong. Players actually came around to that one much later, but still, the point stands. How do you fix it? I mean, I'm actually brainstorming this myself. I didn't realize I was going to get this far. I was actually planning on going this deep into the stream. So I don't have an answer for everything. Team health's good. Okay. But yeah, let's take the Skyrim example. If you can made Skyrim a multiplayer game, how do you allow somebody to have a build that is non-conforming to standard meta still be accepted without either forcing the players into accepting it by the dungeon finder, which hurts community, or breaking apart the player's ability to make a bad choice, which may end up being the right choice later on? One option is to make each of these skill sets diverse enough and functional enough that everything can be viable. But that's a ton of work, especially when the players are going to come up with something better than you can. The players are going to kind of find a way that's better than what you're planning. The players always find a better way than you're planning. Just accept that. If you're in game design, just accept that the players are more clever than you are. The players will always come up with something that you hadn't thought of. Whether it doesn't always mean it's good, but they'll always have something. I think you have to remove the system forcing players together. Yeah, and add back in consenting party formation, right? But then you run back into the original problem of long wait times or all-out exclusion of creating pariahs. Exactly. And the only way I can think of to solve that is community management. Like, the only way I can think of to solve that is extremely aggressive community management. Not to force things, not to force your hand, but to show viability. Like, if people are saying, like, when I was playing in 11, there was a story fight that I was told in no uncertain terms that a ninja could not tank. It was impossible. A ninja can't tank this. They said you had to have a warrior sub-monk, or you had to have a paladin tank. It's impossible for ninja to tank this. There's too many AoEs, your shadows are not going up, you're going to have problems. There's a stage in the fight where there's 3 enemies at the same time. You can't deal with this as a ninja. Obviously, I tanked this as a ninja. I mean, you can tell I'm setting up for this. Obviously, I did that ninja that fight as ninja and successfully. Like, you know this about me by now. Obviously, I'm building up to this. And yeah, I did. And you know how I changed public perception? By posting did I post a video of it? I forget. Either by posting a video of it or by posting a log of it or something of that nature. By showing, hey, I did it. Well, you can't do it. I did it, though. I think the way that you solve this problem is through not strict community management. Like, you don't want to, go authoritarian on it and break people down, but by by showing your developers do complete content with all these options, with bad choices or suboptimal choices, the ones that are viable but not optimal. And when someone says, oh, Ninja can't do this fight, you show a video of the dev team doing it as Ninja. When somebody says that, Dragoon is a bad DPS, you create a video. And this takes a lot of effort and man hours, and you don't have that as a small dev, do you? But can you afford not to? Can you afford not to have that? I mean, you could even, if you have a big enough community, you could even take it one step further and find somebody who is doing it and promote them. Say, hey, here's a video of some guy doing it. Here's a video of someone completing this content with 3 dragoons who are supposed to be the worst DPS class. That's one way of doing it. It stops the pariah nature, then the nature of it, because then the Dark Knights can say, then when people are looking at Dark Knights, they might remember, oh yeah, the dev team did this with the Dark Knight. That actually worked really well, didn't it? That's the best answer I have. Good community management and good community content creation. But that's not easy to do, especially as a small team. Now, I will say, even if you're just a medium team, even if you just have a couple of things out, get a community manager. You're going to need one eventually. You're going to need one probably sooner than later, if nothing else than to root out the fascists. But yeah, consider this a part of community management. Consider this part of making sure your game is in a healthy, playable state. Consider the ability to play the game the way individual players want to play the game as a valid and valuable expression of players. And if you can't do that, then maybe you haven't made a game where player expression is meaningful. Thank you, friends, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. I think that's a good place to call the stream. It's been 2.5 hours, which is a healthy amount of time, and I am very happy. I actually am happy with how the stream went. I didn't really have much of a plan going in. I just sort of was going to say words. I have so much knowledge about this game that I knew that I could just open my mouth and let words fall out for 4 hours, and I still could keep going if I wanted to. I didn't even get into specifics about classes, and I didn't, aside from Ninja, I didn't even get into specifics about leveling areas and the concept of level progression, which is itself an interesting concept. But I covered what I wanted to cover, which was specifically the player expression and player community. Those are the two things I mostly wanted to focus on, and I think I deep dove into those enough to make the points that I wanted to make. So thank you for joining me, friends. We're going to be starting 2 new games later this week. We're starting up Wander Song, and we're starting up Owlboy, and I'm very excited for both. I look forward to seeing you there. Cheers! Oh yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and we have a Discord, which is just a fun and comfy place to hang out. And thank you for the donation earlier. Anyone who else wants to donate can do so. I also have merch. I actually have a couple of keychain merch items made that are available on the Ko-fi link. I forgot to say these things. I sometimes forget to say things. Okay, bye now.